Welcome back. I'm your host, Eric Felix, a proud Chapin, chismoso, and critical policy scholar. Our theme for today is community college policy and advocacy. Today's guest is Linda Vazquez, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Government Relations at the California Community College's Chancellor's Office, a longtime friend, a fellow Titan, a tireless equity advocate, and a crafts extraordinaire. Let's learn more about Linda's road to being an equity advocate.
This road and this journey to be in equity and education is personal to me because I'm an immigrant. I'm one of 6 kids, and when my family migrated here, there were 4 of us at the time. I was still a baby, but I was, I was a dreamer back before we knew or called undocumented students dreamers. And I am, very fortunate to have received our permanent residency, and I think it was around middle school. And I recognize that had it not been for those magical 9 numbers you call Social Security, I don't know if I would have been able to take advantage of all the opportunities that I did. For me, it was always a form of wanting to give back to others because I was fortunate enough to be able to access those resources and fight to ensure that others have them, right? Regardless if they have a social security number or not. I want to be able to instill that same kind of opportunity to others, but in my own way, and that's through education policy. Back in 2009, my first full-time job out of Cal State Fullerton was working at Rio Hondo College.
Yeah, I remember
It was an entry-level position. I was a student service representative, but I was responsible for being the Rio Hondo rep at about 6 different schools that included Cal High, La Serna, a few others in the Whittier area. Students, if they were interested in going to Rio Hondo, they would come to me with questions about the application process, financial aid, and because I really cared about their journey, I followed them from the moment they submitted an application to when they enrolled in a class. I saw them struggle with the assessment process, appealing the placement decision because they got a really bad score on their tests. And despite them having a strong GPA, I, witnessed them being on a wait list, for classes. That was back when it was really difficult to get into these classes. And I just remember thinking to myself, why do they have to go through these hoops? Right. It shouldn't be this difficult. One thing that people know about me is that I am very impatient. I'm not willing to wait around for these things to change. So I left my full-time job and I went to grad school, and I wanted to study ed policy so that I could one day be in a position to make decisions about things like assessment and course placement. So it's pretty cool now that I can be in a position to do that finally.
Yeah, that's great. And now it seems also full circle that you go from Rio Hondo and now working for the state level chancellor's office. Tell me a little bit about that transition.
It's been a decade in the making. The community colleges have always had a really soft spot in my heart because that's where my career started. And let's face it, the majority of our students who graduate from high school will enroll in a community college just by nature of how our higher ed system is designed. And if we are not advocating to ensure a seamless degree pathway and transfer pathway for students at the community college, then they can't get to the BA, they can't get to the workforce. So investing at the community colleges should be important to everyone. And again, I kept gravitating to the community college work just by sheer nature of the importance of the system. And I was a part of policy efforts to pass AB 705 and implement 705. I was part of efforts to support the development of a new funding formula for community colleges, a number of issues, transfer pathways. And again, I knew it was like the world just was, pushing me back to the community college system. So transitioning into this new role as Assistant Vice Chancellor for Government Relations, so far it's been a month. I had my 1-month anniversary yesterday.
Congrats.
Has felt good, has felt right, because I have, quickly transitioned into a role responsible for leading policy efforts like, implementation of 705 and the funding formula. So you're right. I mean, it's been like full circle just coming back, and my journey, I feel like over the last 10 years, every job I've had in the last 10 years was necessary for me to be able to do this job well.
I think one of the important things you highlight is that you're impatient, but impatient in a good way, right? So I think from what I've seen and observed is in your time at Rio Hondo, you witnessed and observed how placement and assessment protocols were really hurting Latinx students and other marginalized students. And in the future work, you advocated for AB 705, which tried to dismantle that. Can you talk to me about how others that aren't necessarily in a formal advocacy or government relations role can take a step in sharing their voice, sharing their time to advocate for better policies in higher education?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think a lot of people tend to think that policy is just at this very, very high level, and sometimes it is, but that it's left to a small group of people and that the decision is solely theirs, but it's not. In fact, that's not how policy should work. For anybody that wants to get involved in policy making and policy decisions, in this example, if you're talking about undocumented students, it can start with, students elevating their voices to their faculty members. That's who they interact most frequently with and oftentimes build the closest relationships and bonds with. Now, that is one example of a stakeholder that can get involved in the various levels of policy making that have nothing to do even with engaging our state leaders like the state legislature, although that is an important element of policy making. But then you also have like ways that faculty can get involved and voice their concerns, and they can do that with their college administrators, with their faculty peers, with the board of trustees and statewide agencies like the Academic Senate. And then you have external advocacy organizations like the Education Trust West, the campaign, and others that can do the same, right? They can, if they want to get involved in policy, first, I think they need to get a good understanding of what everybody else is doing so that instead of duplicating efforts, you're working together to help build a stronger unified agenda. They can produce important research that helps inform policy and practice. They can speak to their local member of Congress or their local representative. They can convene groups for an important discussion around challenges and opportunities. There's a lot that advocacy organizations can do. And quite frankly, we also need advocacy organizations to keep, state leaders accountable, including state agencies and higher education systems. Sometimes we do need that input from the external agencies to make sure that we always have the fire lit under us to do what's right for our students.
Yeah, I think you bring up some good points, and I like to put that in the current context that although COVID-19 and the public health crisis has required many of us to go remote and to participate online, I almost feel like that provides a window of opportunity for so many to be more involved and participate in the policy process. It's almost made these organizations, these spaces, these decision-making meetings accessible to so many. And I know that we've had conversations about now you can log on to a Zoom meeting, provide public comment on a critical issue, and then go back to work, or observe a board of trustees meeting that maybe before was just held in person. And so we have this great opportunity, maybe a silver lining of the pandemic, that allows for us to access and also voice our concerns and priorities.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, if this is the time, if you've been wanting to engage in the policy decision-making process, or just curious to know, what does the Board of Governors do? What do oversight committees do? And what does the state legislature do? You no longer have that barrier of distance and travel in front of you because you can easily participate by clicking on a link. I encourage everybody to participate, even if they just want to be a fly in the wall, just to listen, to participate. I mean, next week, the community college system is going to be hosting its monthly consultation council meeting. The end of September, we'll be hosting our Board of Governors meetings. And again, they're all public and open to everybody. They always were public, but
Right.
now you can participate more easily because it's available online.
Awesome. So now it's an opportunity for us to explore and talk a little bit about some headlines that have been in the news that relate to community college. So our first topic is about community colleges in the spotlight again. These types of titles tend to bother me somewhat because I think colleges are always in the spotlight. They're a critical sector of higher education. the number of institutions, the number of students they enroll, and the type of access and opportunities they provide, community colleges haven't gone away.
I think that there is no better higher education system than the California community colleges to help the state recover from this economic recession. And I think that is evident by the way that they've been quickly able to adapt to an online environment. I mean, you're talking about for some schools that were able to do it over the weekend, others in a matter of weeks.
Yeah, so one of the big takeaways is that community colleges are relevant. They've always been here, and it's not just during a pandemic that they should be spotlighted.
We've always been the largest, higher ed segment in the nation, and now we have 116 community colleges serving over 2.1 million students. I think the importance and the relevance of the community college system has always been great. But now more than ever, I think the incredible work that's happening in the community colleges, especially with being, one of the earliest agencies or systems to make the decision to go online in the fall, is what's putting our work now, I think, more in the spotlight.
So our second topic is clearly related to our current social realities and the ways that community colleges can respond and answer calls to action about addressing inequities that exist in our society. And so what I'm sharing are 5 kind of priorities put out by the Chancellor's office to move forward. In terms of this period where we're asking our community colleges to think more about social justice and racial equity.
Well, first, I think what's important to acknowledge is that this, I say, is a culmination of work that a lot of our colleges have been trying to lead for a long time, some for decades. This is a long time coming, and unfortunately, racial turmoil, political tensions, and the murder of George Floyd was the catalyst for this call to action that came in immediately, I think, in the days or in the week after his murder. This is a culmination of efforts a long time coming. I think that is one of the most important points to note when we are going to our state leaders and asking for additional resources, right? That this request didn't come out overnight. We've been asking for support to implement these resources for many years. And now here before us, many examples of events happening around us that prove why we need it, right? Why we do need an overhaul, review of police and first responder training and curriculum. And I understand that local colleges are already doing that at the local level, but they need support. Not only resources, but they do need guidance. They need guidance from the system on how to do that, examples of how other colleges have been able to successfully do that. That partnership between local colleges and the state is really important. I also think that, to the 5th point around the implementation of the diversity, equity, and inclusion integration plan, this is something that was put forward by the Board of Governors and our state leaders, I'd say last year. We had plans to kind of scaffold that out over time, but now, given the need to address racial injustices head on, the fire is lit, to do this sooner. Like, we've got to speed it, and that goes the same with, I think, all of the points in here, but the fire's been lit to act with a sense of urgency. The longer it takes us to implement these calls, we are losing students through the crack. So I think that the important thing to note here is also just a sense of urgency.
Yeah. And I think that kind of leads to our third topic, is that now with these priorities, you also have kind of a game plan in terms of what you and government relations will advocate for in order to what you just described in terms of the resources or support, technical assistance that's required to achieve those 6 priorities in the call to action.
Yeah, I think what will remain a priority is to continue ensuring that we are making sure that students have a seamless pathway to transfer. So continuing to invest in scaling and strengthening our associate degree for transfer pathways will be important. And that may include, like, taking a look at the ADTs again. This is a 10-year anniversary of the ADTs. Is it still fulfilling the promise that it gave, when the bill was signed 10 years ago? What modifications need to be made to ensure that the promise is still being fulfilled to our students? The implementation of AB 705 continues to be a priority to make sure the students are completing their gateway courses on time. And I know that may not seem like government relations, but that it is an important, I'd say one of the most important policies passed in higher ed, certainly community college. You know, the other thing I was going to mention that is a priority for this team at the Chancellor's office is at the federal level is that we are advocating for equitable funding to our community colleges and the next round of stimulus, funding from the federal government. This is certainly one area topic that I've started to see pop up a lot in news outlets and in social media is the push for the inclusion of headcount over full-time enrollment in the next package, because the community college system was severely underfunded utilizing that formula because most of our students are not full-time and for many, many reasons, but they simply may not be able to afford to. We just talked about financial aid covering the true cost of college. They may not be able to afford to go to school full time. And just because they can't enroll full time does not mean that we should not be giving them the aid that they need. In fact, I think that compounds their challenges instead of helping them. So that'll be a focus for us in the coming month because there is a deadline by which the government is going to make a decision about the next stimulus package. And so we are fortunately joined by a lot of organizations across the country and other community college segments that are urging our congressional leaders to include headcount versus FTE in the next package.
I think you bring up a critical point in terms of the ways that the CARES Act funding was distributed and not understanding that part-time students still have access to all the resources, right? Just because they're part-time doesn't mean they have partly access to a counselor or to advising or to a lab or to, a math support center. And so we need to make sure that all students that are enrolled are adequately counted using the headcount formula, as well as institutions receive those dollars to support them in all the goals they have. Given the importance of community colleges to students, the state, and society, how do we get policymakers at all levels to support community colleges in more tangible ways?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that needs to happen if we want to achieve all of that is making sure that policymakers have all the information about community colleges to just to be well aware of the need. You'd be surprised how many people aren't really aware that we have 116 community colleges or that we serve 2.1 million college students. Just the facts of who we serve and the importance the system plays in the state. Getting that information to policymakers and their teams or staffs will be really important. But the most important, I think investment to ensure that we're achieving reforms, good policy reforms, is to fund community colleges equitably. And I think I've said that a couple of times throughout our conversation, that we are just not funded equitably per pupil, and certainly not per Black student, per Latinx student, and on-P student compared to our CSU and the UC counterparts, despite us serving more of those students than our segments, than the two segments. So we want to make sure that we get additional funding that's going to allow us to implement those calls to action, that's going to allow us to produce those much needed degree earners that are going to be influential to helping the economy recover in the coming years.
For those in the community that do want to advocate for community colleges, either their local one or the system at the Chancellor's office, what can we be doing to support your priorities and your advocacy?
Yeah. Well, one is to stay informed. Again, just like I said that with policymakers, stay informed. I'd say, read the latest research, including yours, by influential scholars and research that produce information about community college reform and research and policy. And that includes, Doctora Estela Bensimon, Dr. Wood, Dr. Harris. I can go down the list. So I think what you find in these reports, including the Campaign for College Opportunity and Trust West, is that they do include some pretty thought-provoking recommendations for how to get involved and recommendations for policymakers on making change. If there's somebody that you've just been dying to learn more about, or someone you really want to just get to know, you want a new mentor, I'm willing to put myself out there for anybody who wants to connect. Ask. I think that now having digital platforms to do that, you don't have to worry about distance being a barrier. If there's someone in Sacramento that you wanted to meet with and just to pick their brain, you don't have to fly there, you can schedule a Zoom. I would say don't be afraid to do that. Send a private message via social media, send an email, make that request. It doesn't hurt to ask.
Well, Linda, thank you so much for your time, for your insight, and for just sharing the ways that we can be better informed as community members, as well as the path forward to crafting policies that really help community colleges achieve equity for the students they serve.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure and an honor. Again, it's nice to see both of us sharing this space, talking about higher ed now in our careers, going from our Titan days.
Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time.